Okay, hey, it is the Prospect Weekly Roundup. I am David Dayen, Executive Editor. We are going to have Mo Tkacik here very soon. I'm sure she will be coming on momentarily. A bunch to talk about. This has been a crazy last 24 hours in terms of news, both salacious and non-salacious, I guess. But the first thing I actually want to mention is that obviously we are about 45 days, I think, from the presidential election. Prospect and its staff are ramping up to go around the country into the battlegrounds, covering the races that matter, covering them from the angle that hopefully you won't get anywhere else. Hold on, breaking news here. Mo is having a little bit of technical difficulties, but she will be here as soon as possible. We need your help to get us out to these battleground states, to Nevada, to Pennsylvania, to North Carolina, to some of the battleground districts in places like New York and California. If you go to prospect.org/donate, you can help us create a fund so that we can travel during this election season and bring you the up to the minute stuff on what's happening in the election. So prospect.org/donate. And if you could do that, that would be really great. We really would appreciate your support. All right. I guess as we wait for Mo and her computer to fix up, I'll get started with some news we just broke on the site 30 minutes ago. And that is that the Federal Trade Commission has sued the leading three PBMs, pharmacy benefit managers. These are middlemen that sit in between health plans and pharmacists and drug manufacturers, and they basically control the flow of transactions in the pharmacy space. And what the FTC has alleged here, and they particularly are looking at insulin markets, the markets for those particular drugs. And I see Mo is joining us here in a moment. But there she is. Hello. Hey, you're on mute, I think. You are muted.
Of course I am.
All right. Yeah.
Oh. Sorry about that.
I was just starting, I was kicking it off with the news that we broke on the site just a half hour ago, which is that the Federal Trade Commission has sued the three biggest pharmacy benefit managers. That's Express Scripts and OptumRx and Caremark. All of these companies are affiliated with large insurance companies. Caremark is Aetna and CVS. Express Scripts is Cigna, and Optum is your friend United Health. And they were sued for jacking up prices in the insulin markets up to 1,200% over the last 20 years. I was just explaining how, what's alleged in the complaint. And it's basically that, and I've said this for a while, the way that PBMs essentially, their value proposition is that we negotiate with drug companies and we get these really big rebates so that you, the customer, whether it's the health plan or the patient, get these drugs at a much lower price because we do the work of negotiating with the drug companies. However, the way that PBMs are paid is essentially through a kickback. It's through a rebate that they get as a percentage of the list price on those particular drugs. And so, just do the math. If the list price is higher, the rebate is going to be higher. And that's exactly what is alleged here. The PBMs preferred higher rebates. They used their formularies, which is the list of covered drugs, to exclude lower priced drugs and put higher priced drugs on that formulary, encouraging the drug companies to raise their list prices and give them bigger rebates in exchange for that exclusivity. So the drug companies make out because they get an exclusive market of patients. The PBMs make out because they take hundreds of millions of dollars out of those rebates for themselves. And the patients, especially patients that actually pay based off list prices, whether they're uninsured or they have a high deductible or high copay or coinsurance, they end up paying much higher prices for drugs. So that is the essence of this complaint. And of course, it's just insulin markets, but this is how all drugs really work with respect to PBMs. And I was on a background briefing, and the FTC officials basically said, yeah, we know that we're targeting insulin right now, but our hope is that this would put a crimp in the entire business model of the PBM and would lead to lower list prices for other drugs, not just insulin.
Yeah, I haven't looked at the complaint yet, and I haven't seen your story yet, so I'm really looking forward to that. I do remember it must have been a year and a half ago that the Ohio Attorney General sued over the insulin prices, a very entertainingly written lawsuit, and that was when that was one from which I learned that the PBMs extract some 53 cents on every insulin dollar or something along those lines. That's pretty high. It's an interesting market, and it shows sort of how if there's any competition for a drug, if there's competition in a realm, it's the PBMs that capture the vast majority of the benefit from that. One thing that I thought was so funny that I was thinking about the other day was how PBMs were not really a thing. They were sort of these a really niche industry, like a coupon industry, really. Until
the first PBM was this thing called PCS, and it stood for prescription card services. And really, all they created was a card that it would basically tell your pharmacist, okay, you get this reimbursement, and you get this. The patient has to pay this copay, but it was really a claims processor. And then in the 80s and 90s, PBMs were bought by the drug manufacturers. So, and the FTC said, well, that's ridiculous. You're supposed to be negotiating with the drug companies, and you're owned by Merck and other drug companies. So that's not going to fly. So the FTC actually did break that up, and they became independent companies. And yet then they were allowed to sort of merge back again and recombinate, really, and into and then they over the last 10 years, they have merged with other insurance companies. So now, instead of being attached on the drug company side of the equation, they're attached on the insurance company side of the equation, and as well pharmacies, because they all own mail order pharmacies, and they steer patients away from pharmacists and to their own services.
And
that's not contemplated
service.
That's not contemplated in this complaint. We haven't seen the complaint, by the way. Monday is when they expect to get it out. They have to undergo some redactions, but we did get a couple pretty choice quotes. There's a quote, this was in the press release that was mentioned. A Novo Nordisk vice president was quoted saying that PBMs were addicted to rebates. And another PBM vice president is quoted basically talking about this scheme where they use an exclusionary formulary to ensure that they have a high value and put a high price on higher rebates. And he's quoted as saying that the company, his PBM, would be able to drink down the tasty rebates. So that's what we got.
We have a question, and I thought that I would this is actually related. Why isn't Medicare allowed to negotiate better drug pricing. That's in the Medicare Modernization Act, which, by the way, is the same piece of legislation, the Bush administration piece of legislation that created this PBM monster. And what's interesting is that Bush's business partner in the Texas Rangers, I believe, also purchased a PBM from Rite Aid back in 1999 or 2000, I think, after Rite Aid got in trouble over some accounting scandals. And so Rite Aid, which had been a family business to that end, they hired some, McKinsey investment banker types who, immediately sold off their PBM for, what they'd purchased it for to this business partner of George W. Bush's, who ended up making something like a 7,000% return. He merged it with another PBM, then ultimately sold it to Caremark, which sold it to CVS. And, within 5 years, he had made himself a very rich man. But this wouldn't have happened without the Medicare Modernization Act, which literally said, oh no, which basically outsourced the job of negotiating these prices on behalf of Medicare to the PBMs, and kind of created this this privatized. It was it was one step in the privatization of Medicare.
Yeah, the prescription drug benefit was not allowed to be managed and administered by traditional Medicare. These private plans had to pop up. And those those private plans, through negotiation, through a PBM with the drug company, that's how you would arrive at the price. Now, obviously, the Inflation Reduction Act changed that. They have, they're allowed to negotiate a handful of drugs every year, negotiate the list price on those. So this is changing over time. In addition, the Inflation Reduction Act capped insulin costs at $35 a month for seniors, but not for everybody else. And there are 8 million people on insulin right now, and not all of them are seniors. I think what's actually interesting here is that if you listen to Kamala Harris speeches, she talks about lowering the price of prescription drugs, and specifically this cap that was done on insulin, and how she's going to extend that to the rest of the market. Here's Lina Khan, who is the chair of the FTC, suing the PBMs for jacking up the price specifically of insulin. And yet, a bunch of Harris donors are trying to get Harris to dump Lina Khan, even though she is engaging in things that are at the heart of Harris's pitch on lower prices to America. So it's very, it's an interesting dichotomy there.
I mean, this is a thing, even Trump, in when he was president, decided at one point that, we were paying too much for drugs, and that we should base what we pay for drugs on what other countries pay. And I think that he commissioned the FDA or maybe OIRA or something like that. But he commissioned somebody to go find out what other countries were paying. And lo and behold, Turkey pays 1/8 of what we do for
Right.
for prescription drugs. And I remember seeing that and just thinking, wow, that gotta hand it to him.
Yeah, I mean, I think what Trump did is he was going to eliminate the anti-kickback statute. Basically, what PBMs do is actually illegal under the law. They get a safe harbor from the law to enable them to be paid based on these rebates, to get a percentage of the discount that they give to the health plans from the drug companies. And this is creating the entire problem that's in this FTC complaint. They're saying that the way in which they get paid means that they have an incentive for higher list prices. So Trump did eliminate that in a way by eliminating the anti-kickback safe harbor, but that was reinstated later on because it's a long story, but CBO basically decided that would cost the government money, even though it would save people money. And because it was labeled,
Yeah.
But then it became an offset. Then it became like free money. So like if you were spending on infrastructure, you could pay for that by delaying or eliminating this repeal of the safe harbor. Uh, because because if CBO is saying that will cost the government money, if you repeal it, that will save the government money, and you can take that money that you invented out of thin air and use it to fund infrastructure. So that's actually what happened. I think what the FTC is doing is finally blowing up this market, blowing up this business model, and saying, this is ridiculous that we have, the central set of companies, and there are three companies that control 80% of all of these transactions. These three companies are sitting at the center of prescription drug pricing, and their incentives are completely misaligned with the public. Why are we doing this? And that's essentially the complaint.
We should I should say, like, if you really want to geek out on this, because we're such geeks on this issue, and number one, Medicare Modernization Act, I'm pretty sure this whole business was created by your friend Tom Scully.
Indeed.
Check out his at the CMS administrator under George W. Bush. Check out David's profile of him. And what is interesting too is how this business model, and the fact that, like, these types of pharmaceuticals, these classes of pharmaceuticals that actually have competition, like the GLPs and the insulin, they're not, it renders them less profitable. So meanwhile, the PBMs also run these sort of specialty pharmacies, and that's why we've seen a lot of action on orphan drugs and drugs that that sort of or orphan-like drugs, and basically we also have a story in that issue that I wrote on how basically the PBMs have forced everybody into the Scully business model. So it is a real, I hope that
and we are going to put we'll put both those in the chat.
So the other thing is that the original guy under Trump, a few short sellers, namely Andrew Left, who has recently been indicted for insider trading, basically. More stock market manipulation, but Left was the first one, I think, under Trump to identify the PBMs as, sort of this pointless parasitic business that he thought that under Trump would surely just be eliminated. He was wrong about that and a few other things, but he did some really great research, some of the first kind of like really pioneering research, because these companies really operated like under, it's just so, like, if you ask anybody who knows anything about PBMs will tell you they shouldn't exist. No other country does things this way. They're completely preposterous. So it is one of those, again, one of those real
a massive amount of power. And I was talking to a pharmacist the other day, and the money that goes through the top six PBMs is about 4% of US GDP. And US GDP is about 25% of world GDP. So you're talking, if you do the math, about one out of every $100 in the world through the top six PBMs in the United States. It's an insane amount of money. And if you have access to that amount of money, you can do a lot. You can get a lot done. It's a truly crazy number. Okay, we're going to stop geeking out and get to the real. I mean, this was a crazy week for a lot of things. I don't even know where to begin, really. I'm going to give it to you, Mo. Where do you want to start here?
I do think that we should mention Ryan Routh, the second attempted.
I mean, that was like 100 years ago. That feels like, right?
I know, but it was since last Friday, right? Last Friday, you guys hadn't had the second Trump assassination. I know it seems like forever ago, and we've already forgotten. I was just reading a story, and the Washington Post finally put everything together on him, and it's still so strange because the first stories that emerged about him, he did seem like an Oswald type figure, or a so, a little bit like a what's his face, Martin Luther King's assassin, James Earl Ray, just in that, like, he was this sort of obscure figure who was clearly mentally ill, and but
Right.
had done a lot of things to draw attention to himself. Well, that in like Oswald's case, to kind of establish him as some sort of, guy on this side of the you know of the good fight, the his exploits in Ukraine. Um,
Yeah,
but
it was bizarre that he's like, all of a sudden, every news organization practice is like, oh, yeah, we have an interview with that guy. New York Times, we have an interview with that guy. Semaphore, we have an interview with that guy. Because during the beginning, I guess, of the Ukraine war, he was very out front, very active in encouraging more funding, right, to go to Ukraine.
yes, and he went to Ukraine. He was photographed with my old boss, Chef Jose Andres, among others. Um,
Okay.
and it does, like, it was a reminder that there is so much money that has flown through Ukraine, and probably at least half of that money, maybe 70% of that money, has just gone straight to the grifter class, the professional weirdo grifter, mercenary, sort of war parasite class. A lot of, weapons have sort of gone unaccounted for. At World Central Kitchen, Jose Andres's NGO, they did an internal investigation. I think that estimated that something like $150 million in donation money had sort of just gone unaccounted for in their Ukraine deployment. So there's a lot of money sloshing around Ukraine, and yet Routh slept in a tent, seemed to have, very little money, seemed to be always hungry and emaciated. So, unlike the guys like, again, James Earl Ray and uh Oswald, who always kind of had, money coming in from, you know,
Something, yeah.
strange sources, it's not clear, and Routh was also trying to import Afghan soldiers um, to Ukraine, and offering them $1,200 or something like that. And somebody from the CIA who was working with the NGOs, was coordinating NGOs in Ukraine, was very alarmed by this, thought he was doing human trafficking, wrote many cables back to, home base saying, watch out for this guy. I mean, there were so many people along the way who said,
Right.
hey, watch out for this guy. It's such a bizarre story, and I'm sure, it just seems like we'll never figure it out. At one point, he had a horse living in his living room, and in North Carolina. This is something that I recently learned.
Wow.
Um, and when he sold his home in North Carolina from Hawaii, again, how did he fund his trip to North Carolina? Not entirely clear.
Right.
Um, but I mean, his trip to Hawaii. But when he sold his home, for something like $200,000, it was completely uninhabitable, needed to be completely stripped. It didn't have a working kitchen or functioning bathroom. Maybe the horse had had
That could be a
overloaded
problem.
it. But it did have a very elaborate system of surveillance cameras and wires, all around the house. So, wow, talk about,
Yeah.
I could have
Bizarre.
spent the entire week just digesting Ryan Routh, reading his self-published book about Ukraine.
But you
But
weren't allowed because there's so
instead,
much more going on. I mean, I didn't think that I, as a journalist, would need to know of the existence of the website Nude Africa, but apparently I do, because that was a haunt of Mark Robinson. He's the lieutenant governor of North Carolina and running for governor, and apparently made statements on that website about being a black Nazi and a whole host of other incendiary statements.
Right.
And all of this was, this was put out by Republicans to try to get him out of the race. Unfortunately, he didn't take the bait. He didn't leave the race, and yesterday was the deadline. So that's why this came out yesterday, is that Republicans were trying to, rat fuck him. Basically, they were trying to get him out, and it didn't work. And now you have this huge liability, who's just been made a bigger liability by Republicans on the ticket in a swing state that Trump really has to win in order to win the presidency. And the Harris campaign is running, constantly all of these clips of Trump saying what a great guy Mark Robinson is. So it's
so because
totally backfired.
Before these before these nude Africa quotes came out, he was a Holocaust denier. I mean, he was
I mean, like this is pretty much par for the course, this
anybody
stuff.
who had spent like a minute, looked at his Wikipedia page, none of these statements that he made in nude Africa would come as a surprise. So how did this guy become the guy? Again,
this is the crazy thing.
Treasurer of North Carolina, Dale Folwell, ran against him in the gubernatorial primary, got completely obliterated, but Folwell was, a known quantity and had a lot of bipartisan support in the state. He was a wingnut on some things, but he was really good on healthcare monopolies. He was very, strangely beloved in Asheville, where he'd, given a lot of support to the fight against HCA. In that area, we spent a lot of time and had a very good bipartisan investigative staff looking at the hospitals and how much money they were taking in from the COVID, the CARES Act, and from just looking at their profit margins and really trying to do something to shake up healthcare in that state. But he was, destroyed.
So that's his profile. And what is Mark Robinson's profile? And this is literally it. Right. I'm going to give it to you right now. In 2018, he was a guy who, a furniture repair guy or something like that, who went to the Greensboro City Council and made a public comment. And the public comment happened to be about guns. It was right after Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School shooting in Florida. And he made a pro Second Amendment gun statement. And it went viral. And 2 years later, he's the lieutenant governor. That was it. Like the Republican Party is structured in such a way that random people making public comments at city council meetings can become like rising stars in their party within the space of a very short amount of time. And the hollowing out of the Republican Party, I think, is a big deal here. Like the qualifications, bipartisan investigations, working on behalf of the people, none of that matters. None of that matters. It's if you are saying something that flatters the ideological sensibilities of Republicans, it doesn't matter where you say it, as long as it was taped and it gets out there. You're gonna shoot to the top, and and there's no vetting.
I sometimes wonder if there is something very like deliberate about this, because I don't know if it's just hollowing out. I've been talking to a Republican county commissioner in Ohio about Ohio. There's a Steward Hospital, and there's this that's something that I've been reporting a lot about.
We'll get to this next, but yeah, tell us the story
of the explosion of this Steward hospital chain. So she has a hospital in her district that's been completely stripped bare, and now they're about to hand it off to this incredibly scummy hospital chain. And she's been asking questions and really trying to do the work and really trying to negotiate a better deal and find funding. And just, this commissioner is really busting her ass to do the right thing for public health. And she really cares about transportation and infrastructure. She's a woman named Nikki Frenchco. But she was primaried, so she's a lame duck. And she has been, the local Republican Party has just gone out of its way to destroy this lady's political career. I think because she just doesn't go along to get along. She really believes in public service. And I kind of feel the same way about Falwell.
Right.
He's an ideological Republican, but I was talking to David Sirota about him once because David knows him for some reason. I'm trying to remember why. Like, the Republican Party is actively trying not to elevate, uh, leaders,
people who
governance.
engage in effective governance. Yeah.
I think it's just because they're, a lot harder to control. Those people are a lot harder to control. And I think the Democratic Party, has some of the same characteristics, but also, relies more on people who, who can bring in, small dollar donations and union union
Mhm.
enthusiasm and that kind of thing. But it does seem in the Republican Party, like if you are a good public servant and if you work hard, that is not going to serve
That's
you.
a negative. That's a mark against you. So you brought up Steward, so we might as well get to this because another thing that happened this week, and this
Right.
was like, way down the list,
Wait,
but it's actually an incredible thing, is that the Senate Committee on Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions actually filed a civil and criminal contempt complaint against Ralph Delator, your friend, who's the CEO of Steward Health, who essentially looted his hospital to pay for his midlife crisis, while this chain of health hospitals, which was what, 30, something like that, 30 hospitals,
at one point it was
went
like about
went
37, 38.
okay. So, they went bankrupt and they stopped paying pretty much all of their bills while Delator and other executives and Cerberus, the private equity firm who engaged in one of the transactions involving Steward, took home hundreds of millions of dollars,
Yeah,
right?
I mean, Cerberus
So,
took $1 billion, and
yeah,
Ralph probably took, all told, he probably took 400 million. I'm
right.
just, we can account for 250 million in the last 4 years. But
And so
also,
Congress wanted to do a hearing about this, and Delator said, "I'm not coming." And they
right.
subpoenaed him, and he still said, "I'm not coming." And so now they file a contempt complaint. But what's actually interesting, so they had the hearing last week, and you wrote about it. I believe we ran that on Monday. But what you wrote about actually is really interesting because what you're saying is that Steward is sort of being recapitulated
Right.
in the form of a different company. So talk about that.
Well, so it's important to note, for context, that the Steward has gone bankrupt, has filed for bankruptcy protection in the Southern District of Texas, a bankruptcy court that we have written about, in Houston. Its architect, a bankruptcy judge named David Jones, is under criminal investigation, for the kind of elaborate corruption scheme that he orchestrated from this court. In 2020 and 2021, this is a court that handled like 40%, 50% of the large Chapter 11 cases in the country. They do
Mm-hmm.
incredible volume. And one of the ways that they do
Yeah.
that, they are very competent, they are very responsive. They do everything that the big debtors firms tell them to do. And in this case, they have, the reason that Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection exists was to allow companies that are, institutions that are, insolvent but sustainable and important to, the community, and to preserve jobs and, have seek temporary protection from their debts so that they can be discharged in a way that makes the, system more sustainable. that hasn't happened at all in this case. The biggest, debtor is their landlord medical properties trust, or the biggest creditor, the landlord medical properties trust. They're not discharging any of that debt. They've just basically handed all the hospitals back to MPT, and MPT is now choosing who was a major conspirator in this whole Ponzi scheme. MPT is now, handing off its hospitals to its chosen hospital operators. And by and large, those operators are have really, really, shockingly negligent and scummy track records. And this is all, so while we're listening to these hearings in the Senate and, in the Massachusetts and in Baton Rouge, where legislators are saying this can't happen again, we have to prevent this from happening again. It is literally all happening again. And in Ohio, they're handing off the hospirator to this operator called Insight. And I've been speaking to doctors and nurses from Insight. It's a Flint, Michigan-based hospital company, but it really seems to be an insurance fraud scheme, an elaborate insurance fraud scheme. They targeted auto insurers. They seem to be doing the same thing in Chicago, where they got a hospital for $1 a few years ago. And they're running all kinds of reimbursement scams, and very, very understaffed. One of the things that was so crazy about the Steward situation was the things that would be repossessed from Steward, the unlikely things that would be repossessed. So
Right.
devices, and somebody ended up dying because they'd repossessed an embolism coil. But they had their boar's head deli meat repossessed from their St. Elizabeth's Hospital in Brockton, Massachusetts. They had the fish in their fish tank repossessed in Louisiana. The Insights Hospital in Chicago, and this is the company that's taking over the Ohio hospital, had its curtains repossessed in PR a couple of months ago, and so they had to go.
How much could they even be?
I know. This is like boar's
what
head.
are they even getting out of the curtain?
Like, how long?
The boar's head.
Can you really resell that deli meat, or is this just
boar's head can, because they had that listeria attack a few weeks ago, so they clearly don't care.
Yeah, so this is one of the things that I'm struggling with right now, is just like, how are all, and obviously the bankruptcy code is being is being abused to make this happen. It's leaving these communities in a much worse situation. But I feel
it's a very hot story, and I'm glad you're going that one level deep, because the story of Delator is bad enough, right? This is a guy who was literally at Versailles during the time he was watching the equestrian events at the Paris Olympics,
right.
Literally at Versailles
during the time with his equestrian trophy wife, who's 29 years. And
while the bankruptcy was going on, and people were suffering the problems of these hospitals. One of these hospitals, the one with the bat infestation that you wrote about so well, the Bat Cave in Florida. In 2016, this is what I think about. In 2016, during the election season, Wells Fargo's fake account scandal broke in like September of that year. And there was a big hearing. It was big news. It didn't cross over into the presidential campaign. Hillary Clinton didn't really talk about it. Donald Trump didn't really even talk about it. But it was like a villain that was available. And, at least Democrats in the Senate were really going hard after Wells Fargo for basically adding accounts to people's, to their name and costing them a lot of money. Here's a similar situation to me. In 2024, we're in the middle of the election. This guy loots these hospitals, who then can't afford to handle patients. There are deaths involved here, as you've written about. as a result, wrongful deaths. There's a villain, and the Senate is taking action on it. And once again, it's just like there's this parallel universe of the election where these kinds of things, healthcare is a big issue.
Right.
These kinds of things don't penetrate the election. It feels like if you named this villain and force the other side to, either go along with you or, God forbid, defend what this villain was doing, it could pay dividends electorally.
And it's funny because the Bloomberg columnist wrote that very thing that a few weeks ago, just saying this is like the quintessential populist story.
Yeah.
And Routh is the quintessential enemy. I have theories because again, he's not even in jail. Like this is the other thing. This Senate Help Committee has done more to actually hold this guy accountable than anybody. I don't know. There's supposedly a criminal investigation underway in Boston. We haven't seen anything yet.
There's a grand jury or something, yeah.
For 10 years. So it's really unclear what's taking so long because they weren't subtle and they also paid
and to be clear, the lawsuit or the contempt citation was unanimous.
Yes.
And actually issuing the subpoena was something like 16-4.
Right.
The Republican ranking member Bill Cassidy is fully on board with this. So it's really bipartisan in the Senate to go after this guy.
But and it's funny because it could be, and I should probably write this too. One thing that the in Louisiana they're particularly trying to push Cassidy toward the point where they now subpoena the Landlord Medical Properties Trust, who was sort of the bankroller and the conspirator of this whole scheme.
Right.
And they're also living, high. They also have about 4 corporate jets, and just live incredibly lavish lifestyles. But there are other Ralphs, right, that have been created by this medical properties trust sort of, it's sort of like an SNL bank, best way to bank. Rob a bank is to own one scheme. It's kind of like that with this. And they've made a lot of guys rich who are a little bit less ostentatious than Ralph. There's this guy Sam Lee who had a chain called Prospect that also blew up in very similar fashion in Rhode Island and Connecticut and Chester, Pennsylvania. And a guy named Prem Reddy who runs a hospital chain called Prime that started in California.
Yeah.
He's gotten filthy rich off of these basically these same schemes. Kamala Harris, when she was AG of California, she actually stopped Prem Reddy from expanding in the state. So she actually has like a track record on this, on this very issue. She could, with a little bit of, finessing, really kind of put herself in the position where she's, talking about this. And every California, like there are so many communities. That was what was so surprising about the Senate Help Committee hearing was how many senators from Mitt Romney to Chris Murphy stood up and said, hey, this happened in my state. And it's a real, the real crisis when a hospital is used as the anchor for a Ponzi scheme and all of the money is sucked out of it. And the nurses and doctors are left trying, without IV tubing or needles or like just basic supplies.
Right. I mean, it's one thing if it's a pet store, it's another thing if people's lives depend on the operation of that hospital. Absolutely. We're hopefully going to put in the chat. Harris just put out an ad tying Trump to Mark Robinson. So I think that's pretty interesting. Obviously, that's going to play in North Carolina. There are a few more things. We got about 15 minutes to go. One thing I want to mention, once again, we did this at the top before you got in, Mo, is that we at the Prospect, we're going around the country. We're trying to cover as many races as possible. And you can help by donating to our travel fund, prospect.org/donate. So please do that if you can. So we got 15 minutes left. I still feel like we've only scratched the surface here. We have a lot more to talk about. One is Olivia Nuzzi of New York Magazine setting back the profession of journalism back many, many years with some sort of relationship, undisclosed what exactly went on. She says it's not physical, but the relationship was with RFK Jr., who is about 39 years older than her, apparently.
And proves it.
So there's that really like bizarre nugget that came out yesterday. What else do we want to talk about? One of the interesting
Exploding
things.
pagers.
What were you going to say?
The Hezbollah in exploding.
Oh, the exploding pagers in Lebanon, which it's has caused. Who knew that Hezbollah used pagers, right? I mean, did anybody use pagers really?
They were trying, and I totally understand because you know a lot of parents are trying to do this is go low tech. It's actually pretty expensive to buy an old school Walkman or Discman these days because parents are buying them for their kids because they don't want their kids to get online, so they're giving them devices that can't be messed with. And that's what Hezbollah was essentially trying to do. They said, well,
I mean, it makes sense in the sense of, you have an underground network that's not trying to, have a large communications tower or something that can be knocked out. But here, Israel has figured this out with a lot of, I mean, I don't think this is a good development in terms of international, innovations in war. That you can smuggle in devices and not really care, detonate them in public without care for civilian casualties. That's not a good innovation,
also,
I think.
I think that the thing about Hezbollah, and you realize, with Hamas and Hezbollah, like there's just this like a very cynical effort to de-civilianize everyone in these countries.
Right.
And it's like there's so many parts of Lebanon, anyone could be Hezbollah, there's teachers, there's and so that I found, this idea that it was such a surgically targeted campaign. It's like they blew all of these up because they were going to be blown up because, somebody had figured out somebody within Hezbollah had figured out the operation and was about to tell. So they assassinated him and then they blew them all up. There was no real, I don't think that this would have been like a mass terror attack. If I think that they might have, they had this ability, but they got found out. And so they decided to like blow them all up. It's just very nihilistic, I think, but it is the mechanics of it and the fact that the IDF sort of created this pager manufacturer is impressive. I can't deny. I like anything that sounds like industrial policy, and I'm a sucker for industrial policy, and I'll admit
there you go.
It's not always
the blowback potential seems high though, because now it's like, oh, this is now inbounds. This is now a thing that you can do. You can put devices of that are put to civilian use, and you can make them weapons of war. Okay,
right. I mean, that if any terror group did this, if this so-called terror group,
absolutely
not be
not be treated in the same way.
Same way. It's it's really bad. I mean, everything about this so-called war has been very bad, and this sets a very bad precedent for for current Tony Blinken, whoever, Mark Miller, to not condemn this because it's a terrorist attack. It's indiscriminate. And again, like it's largely unprovoked. That obviously there's a lot of talk about how many Israelis have been displaced by Hezbollah rockets, but again, what's the body count? So that's another thing. Also, Diddy, I wanted to point out.
Diddy, okay. I forgot about that one.
That happened, and I did a long thread because this is sort of tangentially connected to a story I wrote for the summer issue on future of music, and how do we sort of liberate music from these networks of abuse that seem to have governed it,
Right.
for so
And,
long.
and in that story, you really focused on Britney Spears, but
Right.
it's broadly applicable, and I think Diddy was even mentioned in the piece.
Involves a lot of
Um,
the same
involves
characters.
a lot of the same
Yeah,
cast of
Britney
characters. Yeah.
Spears, yeah, and Britney Spears conservatorship is truly something that, like, there's been, 10 Netflix documentaries about it or something like that.
Right.
But it still isn't like it still hasn't been discussed enough. And her lawyer quit earlier this year. They never really got to the bottom of things. And one thing about that courthouse too is you have to pay for everything, all the documents you download, and it's very expensive. So
Right.
most people don't actually, know anything approaching the full story. The details are so insane. But the woman who the Hollywood fixer at the center of that, who sort of played the biggest part in setting up that conservatorship, which was really unusual because it was the type of conservatorship that is
Right.
historically only for people in advanced stages of dementia. Um,
Mm,
she she also was P. Diddy's fixer and P. Diddy's
mm,
accountant, responsible for moving money, in this whole enterprise. She'll
mm.
probably be, she's probably been questioned, and she also, her uh, uh, vehicles that were incorporated at her office owned both of the houses that were raided. So
Wow.
yeah, there is, but the other thing is that the last time somebody tried to maybe shoot Trump, in or no, then not the last time. Sorry, not the last time. One of the first times somebody tried to maybe shoot Trump back in 2018,
Oh,
at one of his Florida resorts, a random guy, tried to, shoot up a Trump resort and was talking about how, Trump needed to be killed, and also Obama. Under questioning, he told interrogators that he had been Diddy's sex slave, and that Diddy had forced him to have sex with Cassie, and all of this stuff. He had, they've
that's a
got
deep cut. I don't remember that at all.
talking about his, basically there's some word that he used for, basically like I think it's like the Black Illuminati and how it was connected to Trump, and you know the Bill Gates and all of this stuff. But just so you know, those two seemingly
Right.
random things that happened this week, the Diddy,
They
the
come
Diddy
together.
arrest and the Trump assassination attempt, maybe they're connected, who knows? And
All
that's
right.
something that everyone should look at. Oh, finally,
All right.
unions.
Well, yeah. I was going to go. Let's go lightning round for a little bit
Okay.
here. What I think you're referring to is the Teamsters. So the
Right.
Teamsters decide not to endorse in the presidential race after Sean O'Brien spoke at the RNC. Wanted to speak at the DNC. He didn't, but other Teamsters officials did. And in fact, within 24 hours of the Teamsters International deciding not to endorse, uh, uh, locals representing, I think, 1 million Teamsters, and there are only about 1.3 million, endorsed Harris almost immediately after this happened, including some of the chapters whose leaders were in the general board meeting where they sided with O'Brien on going no endorsement. There were also 8 rank and file members, and we have this from Harold Meyerson did a piece yesterday. He talked to some of them with 8 rank and file members who were in on all the sessions with Trump, with RFK, with Harris, and asked questions of them. And all 8 of the rank and file members endorsed Harris, and yet O'Brien decided not to, and then he put out a bunch of polling that showed that while Biden and Trump were kind of neck and neck among Teamster members, and I don't know when they did this polling, I don't know if it was the day after or whatever, that Trump was well ahead of Harris in that polling. And so those are kind of the data points, but I mean, I think it's it's really interesting. Obviously, we don't see unions that stray. A lot of unions just end up, endorsing Democrats pretty much down the line. You don't certainly don't see a lot of union members speaking at the RNC at the Republican National Convention. You said you were in favor of O'Brien doing that, especially at the time when it seemed like Trump was going to be president again. But things have changed a little bit.
I just think that he was invited, the content of the speech was good, and that
Yeah.
a Republican Party that's even a little bit open to being pro-union is an incredible asset, because it'll keep in line all those Democrats who might go astray, or most of them. And I think that I don't think that we should, I think that if a Republican is pro-union, I mean, I just think it's better for the whole. It's sort of like with the antitrust issue. Again, it strengthens.
If you want to get something done, yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
sometimes
I
you
don't
need
think there
these
was anything wrong
transpartisan
with him
coalitions.
speaking, and my understanding was that he also was pissed at the Biden administration for not, he requested a meeting to discuss the yellow bust out, which is another story, another thing that we've
Another
covered.
bankruptcy
And
story, yeah.
they didn't respond, and maybe he was butthurt about that, I'm not sure, but he seems to have made some deal with the devil, because now it does seem like he should be. I also don't understand how the Teamsters support for the Democratic Party has waned post Kamala. It doesn't really, that seems so odd.
No, and I mean, obviously, she was part of the administration that, in the American Rescue Plan, helped bail out Teamster pensions for, I think, 500,000 retirees. She has shown no inclination of changing the general position of this administration on unions in general, and the Teamsters in particular. And so, I invite people to read Harold's piece from yesterday, because it had some good insight into what was happening inside the room.
Yeah,
Uh,
her record on labor is so much more, it's so much less disturbing, or better documented and solid
yeah,
than antitrust, or any of the
yeah,
that we're
yeah,
sort of
and
worried about.
in the weeks after O'Brien went to the RNC, Trump went on that podcast with Elon Musk, where he
Right,
congratulated him for firing workers when they went on strike,
right.
or for saying that they should be fired. I don't remember exactly, but yeah, it's this is kind of, and I know a lot of Teamster rank and file members, including people who may challenge O'Brien in Teamster elections the next time out, which I believe is in 2026. I know there's a lot of anger and frustration there, and so it's a development to watch, because obviously, you basically had two unions which were where the sort of ossified old leadership was taken down by a reformist from within. It was UAW with Sean Fain and the Teamsters with Sean O'Brien. And both of them, over the last year plus, showed the ability to get good new contracts for their workers. Teamsters at UPS, Fain, and the UAW at the Big Three. The UAW then organized the Volkswagen plant in Tennessee. Teamsters are working on Amazon, particularly working on Amazon drivers, who are with allegedly independent companies. They're called delivery service providers. There were about 700 that affiliated with the Teamsters signed union cards this week. We wrote about that. And so, you kind of see these two coming up together, and maybe there's a little rivalry between the two. But what O'Brien's done in this election, I think, has, relative to Fain, who spoke at the DNC and is all in and is doing the biggest member-to-member campaign in the history at the UAW for Harris. There's a real difference in how they're approaching the election, and I think it's affecting, sort of this united reformist union leadership.
again, when he spoke at the RNC, this was really at,
The
Trump's,
low
like,
ebb.
obviously
Yeah.
everybody thought that Trump was, going to win. Uh,
Yeah.
Democrats had resigned themselves to the idea that Trump was going to win.
Yes.
It seems
Right.
like just a savvy move to me. Again, I didn't have anything philosophically wrong with any philosophical problem with it, and I also, thought that it was probably just him sort of hedging his bets. Now it's like, what does Trump have on this guy, or what did he agree
Right.
to? Is it from a place of
Right.
um,
Right. Right.
if he really has gone out among Teamsters, I mean, again, if there is so much support for Trump among Teamsters, that,
Yeah.
but like, I know some Teamsters in Idaho who, nurses,
Mm.
who I remember, talking to them and them telling me, hey, we're all red, we've always voted red, but not anymore. We
Right.
understand that, like, we gotta, like, vote that the we have to go with our the whoever is going to pick the best NLRB. Like, this is
Right.
we have to vote our interests. And they didn't
Right.
have any kind of, like, practical or philosophical problem with that. So that's the other thing where I don't
Yeah.
think that he clearly didn't do a good enough job. And it does give me
And
pause.
not really educating the members. And just to close, the reason that the Teamsters are able to organize those delivery service provider drivers is because the NLRB made a ruling saying Amazon is a joint employer with those allegedly independent companies. And so that allows them to organize and affiliate and bargain with Amazon directly, not just with those affiliate companies. We are out of time. Unfortunately, there's probably five
I
more
gotta go
things we could
pick
talk
up my
about.
kid.
All right. Thanks a lot, Mo. Appreciate
All
it.
right.
Once again, prospectorg.donate. Mo's going to be going to Ohio. I'm going to be going to places in California and maybe elsewhere. We've got North Carolina lined up. We've got Pennsylvania lined up. We've got Nevada lined up. So check it out. And obviously, we do this every week, 12:30 Eastern. And this will be on the website very soon. And tell your friends, check out an archive. All right. Thanks a lot. See ya. Bye.
Have a great weekend.